Welcome back, everybody. So we've been through all of the buyer package for the state of Iowa. So that's going to be this is going to be the last one for the buyer pack, and this one is the purchase agreement. It can also be called an offer to buy, and other items such as that. So, but we normally refer to it commonly as purchase agreement. So, and you'll see people abbreviate that to PA. So, hey, do you have the PA? That's purchase agreement. So, and then by state law in Iowa, you have to disclose and solidify in writing the agency relationships that are involved within that real estate transaction. And so on this one, this top box up here is separated out because that is exactly what we're talking about. So on this particular one, it says it's clearly understood and agreed by the parties herein that the selling broker and all licensees employed or associated with the selling broker represent the buyer. Or if it's a dual agency, we talked about dual agency previously. If it is that, then it can be both the buyer and the seller in a consensual dual agent position, or the buyer is self-represented in the transaction. So you need to check which one of those is correct. And then it repeats that again, and this one talks about the seller side. So it just says that the listing broker represents the seller, or if it's dual agency, again, it'll be both the buyer and the seller, or if they're self-represented, you'll want to use that last box. So, and again, it discusses dual agency in detail. Again, that's, as you can tell, we like to beat dual agency to death. And then they're signing here to acknowledge that they understand fully the agency relationships and who's representing who. So they sign there, and then it talks about again that the listing and selling brokers are agents of the parties here to outline, and then our fiduciary duties of loyalty and faithfulness are owed to the party they represent. However, they must treat the other party with honesty and fairness. They must respond to all questions of the parties accurately, must disclose any material defects about which we have knowledge. The brokers, their agents, employees are not required, however, to discover hidden defects in the property or give advice or matters outside the scope of their real estate license. Anyway, so again, this box solidifies that relationship and really just allows us to move forward with the rest of the transaction. So then it goes on to say that, hey, the buyer party wishes to make an offer to buy property, and then we put Woodbury or Winona or Sioux or Plymouth, whatever county that you're in Iowa. Here's the address, here's the city that it's in, and then the next spot is for the legal description. And so legal description, so if it's a lot and block subdivision, you're just going to put in, that particular, fairly short legal description. However, if it's a long legal, or it's an acreage, or it's something like that, and it's, some of those can be thousands of characters long, you can put long legal C abstract, or long legal C agent, and you can provide them with a copy of that legal description. So then it talks about that, and then also goes on to set some of the terms of the deal. So this is where we're offering, just say $100,000, method of payment to be as follows, and then we discuss earnest money, and it says either check or cash. We don't like using cash for earnest money because it's just too hard to keep track of. So, it is deposited, but it goes through a couple of hands before it gets deposited. So we would just prefer a check. It's easier to track. So, and remember that is always held in in Iowa in the listing broker's trust account. And so if it's if we at KW are writing the offer and it's listed by another brokerage, just remember the other brokerage will be holding the earnest money. So then we go down and we talk about what type of financing is it. And so we've got several different options here. Is it a mortgage? Is it an assumption of a mortgage? Is it a contract purchase? Is it cash, or is it something else? And so, here we're going to say, hey, it's a new mortgage. It's conventional. So is it conventional, FHA, VA, USDA, what other kind of loan is it? And then you have the opportunity to give them an idea of what their down payment is and what the interest rate is and for the term. So one thing I like to point out is you do not have to put any of this in here other than the type of mortgage. You can keep them in the dark and let the pre-approval letter do the talking here. So if you don't want to put 20% or 10% or 5%, put a line through that. If you don't want to tell them what the interest rate is, put a line through that, and then the term, you don't have to tell them what that is either. So all of that will be taken care of on the written credit approval. So, and especially interest rate. If you put down, let's say you put down that it's a 3% interest rate and it goes up to 3.5%, well, guess what? Then they have a right to bail out of the contract based on that one term. So just leave that blank. And then, and it does say a copy of written credit approval is or is not attached. So if you have a pre-qual letter, which you absolutely should have before you're even showing them houses, then you'll put is attached. If you don't have one yet, you just started looking and it's on the weekend and you'll get it on Monday, you put is not and let the buyers or the listing agent know that you'll have it ASAP. Now the next one talks about full credit approval that's supported by an appraisal. What that is remember there's two sides to a financing. There's the person side, which that's the pre-qualification, but then the full loan approval includes the property. So in other words, it has to have an appraisal on that as well. And so what they're looking for is they're looking for the date that you have full loan approval. And with nowadays with all the appraisals taking so long, I usually do 4 to 6 weeks for that. It used to be we could do 3 weeks and we'd have it done, but now it's 4 to 6 weeks. But remember, it just has to be prior to the closing date. So, and it just says if buyer has not obtained written credit approval that's supported by the lender's required appraisal on or before such and such a date, then the seller may rescind this agreement. So you just need to make sure that you get on top of your financing. So, and then the next one is assumption of mortgage or contract. Remember, I've been in this 20 years and I've never done an assumption of a mortgage, so that's something you're very rarely going to use. A contract, that's where the seller actually becomes the banker as well. And if that's the case, we do sell a fair amount of houses on contract, but just remember, it is if you do that, we have to have an attorney draw up the contract addendum, which states that it's actually like a mortgage. So if you get into that, before we go too far down the road, call me and let me know what's going on. And then all cash offer, buyer shall, within 5 days after acceptance, provide seller written verification of sufficient funds to close the transaction. So I want to have proof of funds immediately, so I don't like to wait 5 days. So if you are doing an all cash offer, just be kind of careful and make sure that they do have the money. So the next one talks about other financing terms, and so this is where we would want to put any seller concessions. And so let's say closing costs, if we want, if the buyer doesn't have a lot of cash, and we want to make sure that they have, that the seller pays some closing costs. This is where we put it, and usually this is how we word it. So seller to pay up to $3,000 towards buyer's closing costs and prepaid items. And it's usually about 3% of the purchase price in some of these lower priced houses. So now remember, if you do 3%, I like to see the actual number of 3,000 because it's not vague that way. If you put 3%, it has to say seller to pay up to 3% of purchase price toward buyer's closing costs and prepaids. Do not leave that of purchase price, because somebody had a closing here a while back in another firm where it said 3% of closing costs. Well, the closing costs were $3,000, and we agreed to pay, and that person agreed to pay 3% of $3,000, which is $90. And so there's a big difference between $90 and $3,000. So just be really careful about how you word that on here. So, an appraisal contingency. I always use appraisal contingency on every single deal that has a loan. This really protects the buyer, and the buyer is, we need to make sure that the buyer is protected. So let's say if this house went together at 100 and the appraisal came in at 95, then the deal can be renegotiated. And if you get into one of those deals, call me and I'll walk you through that. So. And then, so second page, so on first page, remember in yellow we sign the top agency part, we initial the bottom. Page 2, this is where we set more of the terms of the purchase agreement. This is where we talk about closing and possession. So, put your closing date in there, and then possession to be upon closing, or it can be at 5 o'clock on March 1st, or, so all of this can be negotiated. Now, if the property is contingent upon the sale of another property, this is where you would check that box and then refer that to the subject to sale of buyer's property addendum, which we've already talked about. So, and that's where again that one solidifies the details of that particular property. So, and then taxes, it talks about taxes and just lets everybody know that the seller shall pay the taxes and liens and everything. Seller shall pay their prorated share. So all of that will take place. So we prorate all of the taxes up to closing date. This says special assessments. The seller shall pay those in full. Duties of the parties. Again, it's the broker or agents make no representation as to warranties. Seller and buyer acknowledges that the seller of real property has a legal duty to disclose location of wells, solid waste, hazardous waste, underground storage tanks, and that kind of stuff. And that refers to a property disclosure statement. And let's see, so next part here, condition of the property. So now A, B, C, D, and E all refer to the condition of the property. So this is where we can talk about home inspection. So A, that just says that, hey, that basically the house is gonna be in its present condition all the way up until closing, and that the buyer has a final walkthrough. Buyer shall have the right to make a final inspection or a final walkthrough of the property within 5 days up to and including the day of closing. And then section B, B1, 2, and 3 is where we set what type of inspection we want. We really have 3 types. The number 1 is within 15 days after the final acceptance date, the buyer at their sole expense may have the property inspected by a person or persons of their choice to determine if there are any defects, including but not limited to material defects or environmental concerns. Should the result of any inspections not be satisfactory to the buyer, then within that same time period, so within the 15-day period, the buyer shall notify the seller or listing broker in writing of this specific dissatisfaction. So if there's something wrong that they need to have fixed, we notify them within that 15-day time period. And then then it just says this contract is voidable by either party if not successfully negotiated within 3 calendar days after the date of notification, and earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. So this puts the buyer in the driver's seat, guys, on when you're walking through the home inspection. So just remember, you want to be very protective, but also on the other hand, you don't want to be overly reactive. There's no such thing as a perfect house. So the second level of inspection is, hey, we've made satisfactory inspection of the property and we are purchasing it exactly as is. This is truly as is. So in other words, we've walked through it, we've looked at it, we're not making any other inspection. And then number 3 is a hybrid of these two. And so basically this is saying, hey, we know we're purchasing it as is. However, and no corrections will be made by the seller. However, buyer reserves the right to conduct an inspection of the property within 15 days after the final acceptance date if buyer finds any defects or environmental concerns that are beyond buyer's expectation. In other words, let's say if they find out there's a cracked heat exchanger, or if there's like an underground storage tank or something crazy, then the buyer, if they either they can back out. Basically, it's just saying that, hey, we know you're not going to fix anything, but if there's something crazy we didn't know about, we're going to back out. So this one kind of is a happy medium between number 1 and number 2. So we'll use that one quite often. And then C, buyer acknowledges that they either have or have not received and signed a copy of the property disclosure statement. New construction, this is just saying, hey, if it is new construction, there shall be subject to the warranties implied by law, by material suppliers, that kind of stuff. And then E, it reminds everybody that an appraisal is an opinion of value and doesn't warrant the condition of the property. So remember, you have an appraisal is an opinion of value done by a banker or done by an independent third party to protect the bank and the buyer. An inspection is an opinion of condition that's done by a home inspector. So remember, there's a big difference between those two. So let's see. And then termite inspection either shall or shouldn't be done. I recommend on any used house that a termite inspection is done. I've seen lots of crazy stuff with termite inspections, and it depends on the area that you're in. There's a lot of them in Merrill, Riverside. There's a lot of them. The Glen Avenue corridor in Sioux City. There's a lot of them, so be careful. And then, okay, so how that works is, so let's say I usually put shall be done, and when the inspection is done, should evidence of termites or wood-destroying insects be found, the building shall be treated in an appropriate manner at the seller's expense. So remember, this ends up being a seller's expense. Buyer agrees to accept the treated property. So if they find termites, this is saying that, hey, seller's going to pay to treat, but the buyer's okay with having a house that's been treated. Now, if there's a whole bunch of repairs that need to be done due to termite damage, if the cost of the repairs exceeds 1% of the purchase price, seller may elect not to pay the cost in such an amount, and buyer shall have the option of declaring this agreement null and void. So if it's exceeding 1%, you get either one of the parties can get out. So, and then included property. This is just reminding everybody that if they are part of the real estate, which is attached, so in other words, carpeting, built-in appliances, light fixtures, water softeners, blah blah blah, all that will be included. And then we always say specifically list items such as appliances, stove, refrigerator, ice maker, dishwasher, washer, dryer, microwave, blah blah blah, to be included or excluded. Now, used to be where we put that in here. However, now we really want, and the banks really want everybody to put that on a bill of sale for personal property. So there's a bill of sale in the file, in the buyer file. So any personal property at all, just put that on there, and that will save you a headache. Because sometimes the appraisers don't like to see personal property on the purchase agreement. So, and then survey. So the buyer, the buyer can have it surveyed. Very rarely does that happen in Iowa, unless it's something, like an acreage or something like that. Rental property, it just says, is it subject to zoning ordinances and stuff for rental properties, so it either is or is not. Insurance, it just reminds the seller that they have to bear the risk of loss between the time the purchase agreement is accepted and the closing date. And if it is damaged or destroyed, then the buyer has the right to complete the closing and receive insurance proceeds, or they can bail out if it's not, if it damages the home. So we actually just had one burned down, listing, Sue Stanik's listing burned down a week ago, and it was under contract. So crazy deal. Joint tenancy. So remember back to your pre-licensing class, this is how your buyer is going to take title. And usually if it's a married couple, you'll do full names and then as joint tenants. Or if it's a single person, it'll say, Mr. Smith, or Robert A. Smith, an individual person. So that's usually how we do that. Tenants in common is very uncommon unless it's a rental property. So next one is abstract and title. This just lets everybody know that the seller will update the abstract up to closing, and then the buyer will have a title opinion done. So that's something that gets handled by the title company. Remedies of the parties. It just says that if anybody gets mad at anybody, you can actually go to court to do that. Which luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had that happen yet. And then court approval. So this would be if the property is an asset of any estate, trust, or conservatorship. The agreement is contingent upon the court approval unless declared unnecessary by buyer's attorney. So a lot of times, if you have an estate or somebody passed away, the court may be involved in that. So And then funds, this is where we actually talk about the closing of the transaction. It just says that everybody's okay with being an escrowed transaction. And usually we like to use red settlement, but if, the closing company of the buyer's choice. So, and we usually don't like to mix those up and do two separate ones, although some of the other companies will do that. But it just says, hey, we're going to use closing company, we'll just say red settlement for a fee of $200, and seller appoints red settlement for a fee of $200. Just says everybody is okay with that. So, so on page 2 we initialed the bottom. On page 3, I see that I don't have that initialed and highlighted, but you do have to initial. And initial right there at the bottom for the buyers. So general provisions, this is just standard common contract language. Don't have to worry about much of that. Certification, this just says buyers and sellers certify that they are not acting directly or indirectly of another group or entity or nation. In other words, they're not laundering money. So a lot of times you hear on like $1 million listing LA, they have $32 million condo and somebody bought that with all cash. Those people are laundering money. So Sioux City, Iowa, we don't get much of that. So, and then dispute resolution system, that lets everybody know that we have a mediation policy that we can use if we ever get to that point. So in the event of a dispute, buyer and seller agree to consider mediation as an alternative to legal action. Again, in 20 years I haven't had to have that happen. So this is where we can point out attached addendums that link on to this purchase agreement. Usually, like the Iowa Septic Addendum is a possibility, Owners Association, that kind of stuff. And if there is one of those, you can check those boxes. And then this is where we can negotiate a home warranty. And so remember, a home warranty can be paid by anyone. It says, home warranty, 1-year home warranty from American Home Shield, which we normally use, shall be paid by either the seller or the buyer at a cost not to exceed X amount, which you want to see the AHS brochure for that price. So just remember, if you're not competing against someone and you're making a fair offer, throw it in there and see if we can get the seller to pay for it. However, if you're in a competing offer situation, you can use that and to say, hey, the buyer's going to pay for it. So anyway, so just remember that's always negotiable, and if you're in a competing offer situation, just keep it as clean as you can. And again, it says definitions. It talks about acceptance days, calendar days, specific number of calendar days, that kind of stuff. And then right here where it says number 24, acceptance, this is where I usually give people 24 hours to respond. Unless it's like a really hot property, you can give them an hour to respond. You can give them 2 hours to respond. But normal customary is 24. So, and then the next thing is, this is a legal binding contract. If not understood, seek competent legal advice. And then this is where, they'll sign, print, date, and then their current address. And then down here in the green, this is where the agent, remember, as agents, we are not a party to this contract. So we do not sign it there. So don't think that has to be a signature. All that is your name and your brokerage firm that you're with, and that's for information purposes for just, let's say, the appraiser. So just remember that's printed, not signed. So that is the basics of the purchase agreement. And so now you can either stop here, or I'm going to go ahead and just kind of go through this as I'm presenting it to the buyer. So basically I'll flip this around and I'll say, hey, okay, so this is the, and by this time I have gone through and asked them what the purchase price is, what the closing date is, all the details. I'm asking them that as we go through it, and then I spin it around and I say, okay, so here's where we're at with the purchase agreement, and I say, this box up here is where it just states that I am your agent, and the seller's being represented by the seller's agent, whoever that listing agent is. And so this just says you understand the basics of that I am representing you. It's going on to say that Bob and Betty, you guys are purchasing a property in Woodbury County, 123 Main Street's the address, Sioux City. Lot 1, Block 1 is the legal description. We're going to offer them $100,000 with a $500 earnest money check to be held at the listing broker's company. We're going to do a conventional mortgage, 10% down, 30 years. We want to make sure that we have written credit approval, in other words, the appraisal done by 2/25/21. And we're going to ask them to pay for up to $3,000 towards our closing costs and prepaid items at closing. The appraisal contingency is going to be checked, and that way if it doesn't appraise at the number that we come up against, or the number that we agree to, then we are totally protected and we would renegotiate with that. So we're going to ask them to close on March 1st, and as soon as we sign the papers, we want possession of the property. Our deal is not contingent upon the sale of our current property, and so we don't have to worry about signing the subject to sale addendum. Remember, the taxes will be paid up by the seller. They'll prorate those, and we'll get a prorate credit at the closing table. There are no special assessments on it. Condition of the property, we talked about home inspections, and so this says we will do a home inspection, and we have 15 days to complete that, so we'll get on that home inspection right away if we get it accepted. This acknowledges that we have received and signed a copy of their property disclosure statement. We've reviewed that already, and that all looked good. And then it just reminds you here that an appraisal is an opinion of value, and that doesn't warrant the condition of the property. It is only an opinion of value and has nothing to do with condition like the inspection does. We are going to ask them to do a termite inspection, and remember, if they do find termites, that'll be a seller's expense to have it treated. However, it just says you're okay with accepting a treated property. So now if there's a whole bunch of damage, that'll show up on a home inspection, but also if there is damage from termites, if it exceeds 1%, we can get out of the deal. So included property, we're going to put that on a bill of sale, but we do know, that the carpet and blinds and all that stuff stay, and then we're going to ask for, on a bill of sale, we are going to ask for the stove, the fridge, the dishwasher, the microwave, window coverings, blinds, and the softener. So that's what we're going to ask for on that. Okay, so survey, we don't have to worry about those. It's not rental property. This is how you guys will take title, so your full names as joint tenants since you guys are married. We will get an abstract and title. We'll get a title opinion and make sure that the title is completely clean before you guys close on the sale. And then we're going to use Red Settlement Company, and there's a $200 fee for that on our side, and there's a $200 fee for that on the listing side also. Let's see, certification. This just says you guys aren't working on behalf of a foreign entity to launder money, and so I'm assuming since you're getting a loan, you're not laundering a whole bunch of cash. And then a dispute resolution system, it just says that if buyers and sellers get into a dispute, there is a mediation process that can be used. And then we are going to ask them to provide a 1-year home warranty plan from American Home Shield at the seller's expense of up to $500 at closing. And then we're going to ask them to get back to us by tomorrow at 1 p.m. And so that gives them 24 hours to respond to us. So does that all make sense? And they'll say yes, and I'll say okay. And then I'll go back and have them sign and initial everything down to this point. So, and again, I'll have the bill of sale here at the same time. And again, this will establish what stays with the home. If it is listed on the property disclosure or the MLS and is not listed here, it will not stay. So if they said, hey, we're going to include a lawnmower, and if it's not on here, it does not stay. So just remember that. You can get into big trouble with that. So anyway, so that is the purchase agreement, guys. So they're pretty self-explanatory. The Iowa ones are super, super clean. So again, review, always read through the purchase agreement first so you kind of understand it, and then you can paraphrase it like, similar to what I just did. So anyway, so I hope that is clear as mud to you guys. Have a great day. Here we're having a blizzard warning, and so it's just starting to snow, and it's supposed to blow like 50 miles an hour. So anyway, so you guys have a great day, and call me if you have any questions.